Greetings everyone, Michele Granberg here. Welcome to another episode of Positive Energy, bringing enlightening television for your evolving soul. Our topic on this show is the near-death experience. A near-death experience, or NDE, is a period of time when a person is clinically, physically deceased. They visit an afterlife in some form, and then miraculously somehow they return. For the majority of survivors, NDEs are reported as extremely positive and life-altering. My guest, Robert Kopecky, has written 2 books on how he survived not 1, not 2, but 3 NDEs. He discovered exactly what lives on the other side of our fears about dying and living. Ready to learn more? Then stay tuned as Positive Energy starts right now. So I'm happy to welcome Robert Kopecky to Positive Energy. Nice to have you.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm very happy to be here. Of course, when you've had 3 near-death experiences, you're happy to be anywhere, right? That's pretty much.
I felt that joke coming, and it was still good. It's still good. So you are an author of 2 books, How to Survive Life and Death, A Guide for Happiness in This World and Beyond, and your second book, soon to be released in 2018, How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying, Wisdom from a Near-Death Survivor. So your books are about nearly dying 3 times and what you learned. Death is one of the greatest mysteries, so I am really happy that you're here to enlighten us and shed some light. It is not a somber discussion. I know it's going to be a fun and enlightening discussion. So let's start with a basic definition of a near-death experience.
Well, I am kind of one of the fun death guys, if you can have such a thing.
I think you're in a category all your own, the fun death guy.
Well, I mean, just once you realize that there is no death to speak of, we move from this body into another existence, and so you don't actually die. You leave this behind, and so that's sad. And there is the kind of instincts that you have as a human being that make you want to stay here and continue and like that, but it's still, when you realize that there is no death, then it's not quite as daunting as it is otherwise. But the near-death experience is this phenomenon that occurs when people come very close to dying. Like me, obviously, I didn't actually die, or I wouldn't be here. And it's the same case with any near-death experiencer. That they experience something after this life. That some movement into a greater or different reality. Yeah. Sometimes it's very specific. Sometimes it's very difficult to figure out at all. And other times it falls into one of these sort of typical categories or motifs. My 3 near-death experiences did that. They were all motifs that are typical to near-death experiencers.
What's commonly reported.
Yeah.
Almost universally.
The near-death experience thing has gone from being something that when my first one happened, very few people spoke of them, or there was very little known about them. You had people like Raymond Moody or Dr. Kenneth Ring, or I think PMH Atwater had written her first book or books at that point.
Yeah, I remember reading Daniel Brinkley's book and Betty J. Eady. That was the 90s, though. Yeah,
see, my first one was in the 80s, so it was even before that. So I didn't talk to anybody about it. It wasn't all that well known. Now there are estimates that up to 1 in 20 people are near-death experiencers. Wow. And Pim van Lommel, who's a Dutch cardiologist, did a study of 2,500 people at his hospital and discovered that it was around, I think, 15% or so of cardiac arrest patients that had had some kind of experience afterlife, so to speak.
So you had 3 near-death, nearly dying experiences. Each was distinct and different and separate. So tell us a little bit of the story about your 3 experiences and what made each one different.
Sure. Yeah. The first thing I would suggest is don't do it.
Avoid it if you can.
Avoid it. Near-death experiences are to be avoided, And some people have one near-death experience and it changes everything for them. And for me, because of some of the sort of cultural reasons that I described a minute ago, I didn't know what to do with it, and I didn't feel like it had really changed my life. The first one occurred about 20 years ago or so. I was in Los Angeles and I was driving through a neighborhood that I didn't know very well at twilight. And this will tell you right when it was, because something happened to my cassette player in my car. Mm-hmm. And the tape got swallowed and I was fussing with it. And just as I reached down to fuss with the tape, I glanced off an oddly parked car. I was going maybe 35 miles an hour or so, and went like straight into a telephone pole. Boom. And I lost consciousness, or blacked out briefly, but in the next instant I was back into a kind of a different kind of consciousness. I was at the top of the telephone pole, looking down at the car, smashed into the telephone pole, with the windshield broken out and this body kind of draping out of the window and fluid spilling onto the ground and moths flying around the street light next to me. I could look over into people's yards, over hedges and bushes and the like, and saw people running out of their houses, lights going on the porch, and people running out and hollering to get an ambulance and the like. And witnessed this from this completely comfortable, easy, sort of weightless position that I was in, kind of floating, as it were. But I realized it was me. It was my car. I tried to move down towards the people when the ambulance arrived, and they were loading me in, and I was trying to communicate with people, but I couldn't. And the whole time I felt as though there was an entity, or somebody with me who was sort of like kind of taking care of me, who said then, more or less said, I don't really recall the actual words being said, but time to move along, kind of. And I was shepherded into what was sort of like a cloud bank, like a warm gray cloud bank. I don't remember exactly my passage, but I ended up in a very pastoral sort of park-like setting, having a conversation very much like the one I'm having with you, with an entity who I don't really remember exactly. When I tell my stories about my near-death experiences, I try not to elaborate too much beyond what I actually remember, because I know that memory can be
we tend to embellish.
Right.
It's kind of woven into the memories. Right.
And so I've tried to really kind of crystallize those memories in place, because they're already meaningful enough, outside of my body like that, and looking down on this scene, and years later, after much meditation and study and stuff, and I'll get to a little of that later, but when I'm able to revisit that experience, you can't put that genie back in the bottle. That's something that's a very unique experience to near-death experiencers, or people who are able to somehow have out-of-body experiences, because it does happen spontaneously or even intentionally.
Yeah, people try to teach themselves to do it.
Right, to travel astrally and the like. And one realizes the reality of being this energetic, effervescent, diaphanous, spiritual being who's inhabiting this human form. And
that's the part that continues.
And that's the lesson I call
beyond
the lesson
death.
Of perspective. So that now that we're in this human form and we're on this plane, one becomes capable of sort of detaching with compassionate, like a compassionate neutrality about things. Not detaching in a cold way, but being able to sort of perceive people as vehicles of their spirits, and their spirits as expression of this greater, what I call divine consciousness, that I was entered into on the other side, Because I didn't lose consciousness, I felt more as though I opened up into it and became part of it, enfolded in it.
And that's almost the opposite of what people expect. You actually woke up, became more awake. You were more heightened.
Yeah, a different form of consciousness. And I think of it in terms of not being limited by the physicality of being a human being. We experience our consciousness through the filter of being a human, naturally. So that was my first one.
That was your first one?
Yeah. Do you want me to continue and give you all?
Yes, give us
okay.
a brief synopsis of the other two.
All right. After that, I kind of lost interest in what I was doing. I was very busy as an illustrator and designer and teacher at that time in Los Angeles, and my wife and I at the time left. We dropped everything and we traveled for about a year or so around the world. We were not spiritual people, but we went only to spiritual places. We went to cathedrals and ruins and explored the Mayan underworld and looked for tiki in the South Pacific and went to Buddhist temples and, just all of these spiritual places. And on my return to San Francisco, we went to my aunt, who had played a very large role in my life, had been very helpful to me, died, and I was at her bedside when she died, and it sort of knocked me out of my out of alignment a little bit. My marriage was kind of on the fritz. I ended up moving to New York City, and I led this sort of riotous lifestyle, downtown Manhattan, nocturnal kind of life. I was an artist, bohemian. And it kind of caught up on me, and you could call it a drug overdose or a kind of a cascade of toxic events or something. But I fell out on my apartment floor and completely lost all sensation in my body. I couldn't move, and I didn't go any place like I had in the first time, but instead a place came to me. A white cloud filled in all of my experience, the whole room filled in completely, a brilliant white cloud. I was no longer me in my body, but I was there. I was still me. And we always are able to see in our near-death experiences, so we always remain ourselves in some sense of it. Mm-hmm. And I had this kind of presence behind me again that said, look. And I looked and there was nothing there, and then it opened up this kind of a screen. And I had what's called a life review, where these scenes from my life, and these were not golden moments, this wasn't a highlights reel. These were these sort of seminal, pivotal moments.
Defining moments.
Perhaps had not been as present for as I could have been. And I can't remember exactly what they were. I do remember one fairly distinctly being that I was hurting someone and I didn't realize how much I was hurting them at the time, or I didn't want to realize it. And I had maybe 5 or 6 of these sort of serial events shown back to me in a way that wasn't like a movie screen, but more like this kind of box of reality that I was reliving again. And then the external reality of my girlfriend at the time hollering at me started to kind of started to kind of seep into it. And slowly the whole experience just kind of faded away, and I was back in my apartment on the floor and sat up and was able to move around and think again and stuff and calm my girlfriend down. The first one I was out for about 18 hours, the first car accident. The second one, this was only about an hour or so, this whole event. So that was
really interesting because, I've heard about the life review before, and I've read about that, and I've pondered it very often myself in terms of what it can teach us. I've never heard someone who's went as far into death that they had a glimpse of that. Although they say in movies all the time, my life flashed before my eyes.
Right.
So there's a lot of truth in that.
I think we've all had those episodes where scenes pop up, kind of thing. This was a unique situation where I had this sense of the focus of presence. I realize when I think about my life that it's not very much different right in this very moment as it has ever been. The externals have all changed, where I am and what kind of shape I'm in and stuff is all different. But my experience from in here is not all that different than it ever was. So this is the moment in which we have the opportunity to focus ourselves and to be there for one another.
This is the one that counts.
Yes.
So you're getting into, so just talk a little bit more now, I think, about the lessons, the most important ones about living, because your books, you primarily talk about applying these lessons from dying into this current life, because hello, here we are. We're
Right.
here.
And
we don't want to
here
wait
is-
till we apply them after death. We want to apply them now, make it better, this life.
There's not that big a difference between different lives.
Right, it's seamless. That's what death teaches as well, that
Yeah.
it's a continuum.
Right.
It's not an ending.
Exactly.
Like
But
pulling back
here's
the
something
curtain.
that does remain consistent, though, is that eternal moment, this eternal moment that we live in. And so the second lesson, the first lesson was perspective. The perspective to be able to back off from people and see that consciousness expressing itself through the filter of a person's experiences in life, through the human form, right? And be able to identify with that we're all the same thing here, trying to do the same thing. And the second one is, the second lesson is that of presence. That I can make the most difference in my life right now, always. It's always right now that I can make, or I can plan for that moment when it comes so that I can be there for you to be able to fulfill my purpose, which is my third lesson, and I'll get to that with my third experience.
So that's when you talk about karma, that's your definition of karma, is that the choices we're making now, if you want to affect your future and change all of your experiences, you have to be present. You have to start
Absolutely.
in the now. This is causing a ripple effect and a trajectory going forward.
Right.
And it's impacting your experience of death as well, even though, as you say, death is not as big a deal. It's not
Whatever life you're living.
It's not the culmination, right? It's in that continuity of life.
Yeah. Well, I think that
be selective of your choices that you make.
Yeah, I think that the Tibetans and Buddhists and all are absolutely right about this. I'm not surprised that they have it right, because I think they have a lot of things right about this. Karma, of course, can have a tremendous influence before you're even aware of it, and oftentimes because you're not aware of it. I was not aware of the karma I was creating in my life. Even after that second experience, when I realized that there were these moments that had gone by that I had dropped the ball, so to speak, that I had created something that I needed to repair somehow in my life. Up to that point, I had not realized that life was this series of causes and effects, that I was exercising my own will to create this body of experience that was designing my life. You know?
You had a real direct experience of that. So how has it changed you? I'm sure you could talk forever, but give us a couple of practical ways where it shows up in your life. How are you living differently because you died 3 times?
Yeah, it didn't change me that much at that point, because I still did not have a community, or I didn't have a language to speak about it.
It took a while for
you
to understand and realize and talk to others and get some kind of sense of...
If I talked to people about this, all the people around just looked at me funny.
I can't imagine. What?
They did that a lot anyway. But at any rate, I realize, that the gift of presence, that lesson of presence, made me realize that very thing, that in each moment I am building my life. I am either, hopefully, making up. I have an opportunity to make up for bad karma that I've created in my life, which I am furiously trying to do every day.
That's a great message for people to hear. It's never too late.
Absolutely.
It's never too late.
Right. Everything occurs in this eternal moment, regardless of what life we're in. So time is an experience of our biological form, I think. It's something different when we get on the other side, where all of this stuff can kind of happen Einstein-like.
Yeah.
So I
in
have...
the quantum world.
Right. So the perspective and presence have really changed the way that I live my life. But it took some time for that to happen. I had to have my third near-death experience. Would you like me to tell you about that?
Just briefly, yes.
Okay. With that one, I was out west, and I was moving from New York to Arizona, and I was assaulted by what we called skinheads at the time, but a thug, right? This kind of a neo-Nazi sort of a kid. assaulted me, and when I was fighting back, I was knocked unconscious from behind with something, a blunt object, like a tire iron or something. And I was stomped and kicked for the better part of an hour by a group of these, a gang of these guys. This was my least favorite way to go.
I'm so sorry that happened.
By the way.
I'm glad you're here.
In retrospect, it's not so bad, but at the time it was pretty awful. Although I got knocked unconscious right away. And I went to another place that wasn't nearly as heavenly-like. It was much more elemental. It was kind of darker and had the feeling of being in the earth in a funny way. And I was surrounded by a group of benevolent entities, and still this feeling of being folded into consciousness and love, fully loved, fully supported, right? And I did not want to leave. And they were telling me that I needed to because I hadn't done things right. What do you know? I hadn't gotten it right up to that point.
Go back and try again.
And in my memory, they lifted me up and pushed me through something, was the sensation that I had. And almost like popping through a membrane, kind of. All the while telling me, go back and, do it right. My eyes opened up. I was laying on my back on the sidewalk in this Arizona town, and there was an emergency medical worker over me who said, "He's back." And it took me some time to recover from that. I needed reconstructive surgery and stuff. I was in really bad shape from it. I had been out for about 3 or 4 hours. And I came back to this world realizing I had to be in this world for some purpose. And so that's my third lesson that I talk about, particularly in the book, How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying. So their perspective, presence, and purpose. That each of us does have some unique...
Yeah, we're not here by accident. We have something to learn as well as something to give.
Absolutely. And you may not think that it's easy to think, okay, I should be a movie star is what I should be, or, I should be the president or something like that.
It has nothing to do with our job,
it doesn't
our vocation.
Need to be anything grand.
Yeah.
And in fact, spiritual success is very different from material success.
Very different.
And happiness is not created in the material world without spirituality.
So I know that you've been going around talking about your books and giving this message. I think just sort of in closing, what has been the response to that, and what is the main message, if there was just one, that you would want people to really go away with?
The main message I can tell you is to remove the obstacles to love in your life. That's kind of the nature of being in this outfit, is that it brings all this stuff up that makes us think one way or another. If we can detach ourselves from our serial thoughts, and meditation is a great way to do that.
Yep.
Meditation and prayer. Make ourselves of service to others, recognize the eternal in one another primarily, and don't sweat the small stuff, I've heard it said, right? Then we can be present in a way that we can remove the obstacles to love, which I see as this field. That's the nature of divine consciousness. That expansion into consciousness I experienced was an experience of love as a field of being that's constantly arising in different forms in this life. It's constantly presenting to you the directions to go, the things you need to work on, that kind of stuff. And so that's the main message I'd like to give.
Remove the blocks to love.
The obstacles to love, yeah.
Release the obstacles
and
to love.
And follow it in your life.
And follow that in your life.
Recognize the eternal in things.
There's always that nudge that's always showing you that.
Yes.
I would imagine as well.
And if you can get away from the demanding, labeling, comparing, judging voice in your head, there's a place of calm reason, of intuitive intelligence that you can inhabit, that I call your authentic self, right? And that's your spiritual self. When I go out and talk to people about it now, I don't really care so much what they think about what I'm saying anymore. But I also find myself often in this community of like-minded people where I feel right at home talking to people about this.
No coincidences.
It's fun to talk to people that are skeptics. I really enjoy that because I like to get a little scientific about quantum physics or the nature of consciousness and the scientific examination of what it could be to bring to life inert matter like is going on right here, right now. So that's a lot of fun for me. I enjoy talking to people.
Yeah, I bet you can, to see in their eyes maybe that little bit of an aha moment where they open their minds to something.
Absolutely.
That must be extremely rewarding to you, and part of why you're out there doing what you do, and maybe part of why you're back, why you didn't leave forever, and why you're still here.
Right.
And so it's a really, really important message, you know, for people to experience that what death teaches us is how precious and how wonderful and magnificent this life really is, and that there really isn't anything to fear.
Absolutely.
I love that it always comes back to love. I love that it comes back to love.
It does, because that's what it's all about. One of the things that I've been really lucky to be able to do is to help people that are dealing with issues around death. How to Survive Life and Death, that first book really is about that. It's really to help ameliorate the kind of fear and grief and difficulties, because when we show up for death with this kind of understanding that the soul requires it for our spiritual growth, and it's not the end of anything, whatever kind of, whether you lose your job or you lose your life, there's this passage that we have to go through to be able to become teachable and grow from. So when I can be with people who are at the end of their life or in situations where somebody has recently died and be of help to them, be of service to them, I really enjoy doing that.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful
it's a great
service.
thing to be able to do.
People should really check out your books for more on your story and see if that really resonates for you. But I just want to thank you on behalf of everyone then for the work that you're doing in the world, and I really enjoyed the book. I look forward to reading the next one, and I really just want to thank you for being here today on Positive Energy. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Michelle. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much.
It really has been.
We're wrapping up another enlightening show. I hope we brought you some comfort and that you remember there's nothing to fear around death. Your true purpose in living is to live well, live fully, as long as you are alive. Please visit MicheleGranberg.com. Thank you, Monday Morning Flowers, for the beautiful floral arrangement. Thank you for watching, and join me next time on Positive Energy.